Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.
Gentlemen, good afternoon from Ireland. My agenda for the next 45 minutes or so in support of this question, do excellent people need to be led, is very simple. I'll start, if I may, with a concise introduction as to who I am. I'd then like to just spend a moment or two on understanding the definition of excellent within the context of the question, do excellent people need to be led? What I'd then like to do is just share one or two ideas on how to go about leading people who are truly excellent, and then we'll conclude the webinar, if it's acceptable, with any questions that you may have. So on the assumption that that agenda is suitable for everybody, my background is that I'm a citizen of Ireland, and in 1985, having joined the British Army, I attended the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst, which is an academy that is focused on developing leadership capabilities in Army officers, not just from the British Army, but from all over the world. So in my platoon at Sandhurst, we had cadets from Brunei, Zaire, Zimbabwe, and Qatar. And there were 24 cadets from foreign armies throughout my division. When I left Sandhurst, I was commissioned into the 2nd Gurkha Rifles. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with who Gurkhas are, I've used this photograph. This is, I'm the young officer at the front. The men in the company behind me are Gurkhas. Gurkhas are Nepalese citizens who soldier on behalf of a number of different armies across the world. The relationship with the British Army was established nearly 200 years ago, and a small number of British officers each year are given the opportunity to serve with Gurkhas. So that was the reason why I used that photograph, just to give you an insight into who Gurkhas are. The working language in the Rifle Regiment that I joined in 1985 was theoretically English, but I would have said about 80% of the riflemen we communicated with the riflemen in the Nepali language, so I spent 10 weeks learning to speak the Nepali language. This is the other side of soldiering, the slightly grittier side. This was in an activity that we undertook to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Australia, which is the Australian bicentenary. So that is my background. I received excellent leadership development training at Sandhurst. I then had the opportunity to put it into practice in a Gurkha battalion, which included service on operations, although the world was a relatively quiet place in the late 80s. I left the army and I worked then on a diamond mine in Angola in West Africa. I've highlighted Angola roughly with the red arrow. I was actually born in Zambia, which is next door. My late father was an Irishman who was working as as an administrator on behalf of the colonial service in Zambia. So I was born in Africa but left when I was very young. I returned in 1991 with a team of people to work on a diamond mine on the Quango River in Angola. The civil war had just finished and we were waiting for the first democratic elections. Unfortunately, the elections in October 1992 led to a re-escalation of the civil war, and the UNITA army and the government again engaged in conflict. The direct result of that was the diamond mine we were working on was attacked by the UNITA rebel army, and my team and I and all the other expatriates and Angolan employees were held captive for a number of days. In my case, that was 4 days before we were evacuated on a plane like this, but not this plane that was being flown by the Brazilian Air Force. And we were evacuated due south to Namibia. This is my Irish passport. If you look at the visa stamp on the bottom left-hand corner of the page, that was my access or entry stamp into Namibia. You can see there that my purpose of visit here was evacuation. So that is my background. The additional aspect to the story that relates to Angola is that when I was in Namibia, having been held captive for 4 days up on the mine in Angola, my boss at the time asked for people to volunteer to go back into civil war-torn Angola. Now you can imagine, having just been held captive for 4 days, that being asked to make that decision, was relatively daunting. And I was asked to go back in my capacity as the person leading a team of, by then, 30 retired Gurkhas. And despite the fact that I had incredibly capable, highly professional and very experienced men in my team, what I knew based on my service in the Gurkhas was that the decision I made as the contingent leader would have a significant impact on the decision that they ultimately made. They were in a position to make whatever decision they chose to make as individual employees, but for, in some cases, 10, 20 or 30 years of service in the British Army, some of my men would have been dependent on the decision-making of young officers. So I was fully aware of the implications of the decision that I chose to make regarding whether or not I returned to civil war-torn Angola. The answer is that I chose to return to civil war-torn Angola, and the people in my team chose to come back with me. Before I move in to some of the simple concepts for leading what I deem to be excellent people, that decision of mine to go from the safety of Namibia back into civil war-torn Angola has been perceived by some people to be a brave decision. I would caveat that very strongly and say that it wasn't a brave decision, that actually it was a very easy decision, and the reason it was an easy decision was because of the capabilities of the people that I had in my team. Because I had 30, as I've said, highly capable, very professional and very experienced men with whom I had worked in a challenging environment for about 12 months. So we built up some mutual understanding, a lot of mutual respect, and a very strong ability to work together as a team. If my team hadn't been as capable as they were, then the decision would have been a far more challenging decision for me. And when I've now worked in the commercial world for 20 years, which is what I now do as a leadership development coach, one of the key principles clearly for any leader is that not only must they focus on their own development, but more importantly, they have to ensure that they are developing their people consistently so that their people are able to meet and overcome any foreseen challenges, but also to be as well prepared as possible to overcome any unforeseen challenges. So that's my background. Here's the question. Do excellent people actually need to be led? And when I was thinking about this as a title and as a webinar subject, one of the things that sprung to mind was, how do we go about defining excellent? Because I've worked with a number of very large organizations, globally recognized brands, and what I have seen in 10, 15 years of working alongside these specific brands and specific businesses within the brands is that there have been occasions when the definition of excellent has changed. And a simple example of that would be that I worked with a large sales team, about 1,000 people in a sales team in a global business, but primarily focused on the UK. And in the 3 years that I worked with that specific business, for about 2 of those years, the definition of excellence was driven by sales performance. And within the team of 1,000 people, there was a tier of about 20 people, 20 individual salespeople, who were deemed, based purely on their financial results, to be excellent. And if you analyze their performance in comparison to the rest of the organization, then that would have been a very easy deduction to make. It would have been a very easy label to apply to those people. What was clear about this top 20 was that they were managed, led, coached, or essentially treated in a very different way to the other 980 people in the organization. The top 20 they were given a lot of credibility, they were given a huge amount of autonomy, they were given very significant financial reward and compensation, they were used extensively as ambassadors throughout the business. And I'm not suggesting that that's the wrong thing to do. to people who generate disproportionate results. But unfortunately, in 3 or 4 cases, or 5 or 6 individual cases within that team of 20, it subsequently came to light that there were reasons why they were delivering such high levels of performance, and that some of the methods they were using to deliver those high levels of performance contravened the values and principles by which that business was being run. Now, the deduction that I made as far as this group of top 20 sales performers was concerned, and linking back to my time as a young officer in the British Army, was that while the British Army philosophy is clearly to trust every person who you lead, the fact that you give them that trust does not mean to say that you abdicate responsibility for how they perform and what they deliver. So you can give people who are ostensibly excellent, you can give them very high levels of autonomy, and as we'll see in a second, that's clearly one strategy that you can use to lead and to develop excellent people. But in the giving of that autonomy, what you cannot do is abdicate responsibility for how they achieve what it is that they achieve. The upshot of the experience that I had in that commercial organization was that when we sit down to analyze the leadership strategy that the leadership team are going to use with their high performers, that step number 1 is for all of the leaders to understand that they have to have absolute clarity on how their top performers are actually delivering that performance. And again, I would reiterate the rationale behind developing that level of understanding is not that there is a lack of trust, but everybody, all leaders, have got to be absolutely sure that what their people are doing is aligned to the corporate culture, to the brand values, and to the integrity that the organization brings to its sector and to its marketplace. So again, I'm always very clear with any clients that we work with that they have to have absolute clarity on what they mean by excellent, or how they define a top performer. If we make the assumption that we have a team of top performers, then there are a number of strategies that you'll appreciate for working with people who are top performers. The one that I'd like to talk about very briefly is what's called, or is referred to as mission command, which is a strategy that is used extensively throughout the British Army. When I was a young officer, the principles that underpin mission command were something that we used on a daily basis, although the strategy had not been given that label at that time. Depending on which article or book you read, some people trace the origins of mission command back to a war between 2 countries. The army of one country was incredibly well trained and extraordinarily disciplined, but highly dependent on instruction from the leadership cadre. And the army they were facing was everything that they weren't. So in other words, the army on the other side had been put together at very short notice, had had very little training, had very little discipline, and as a result had no concept of being instructed or led by a leadership cadre. And the rabble army, the not well-trained army, took to the battlefield at very short notice. And anybody who has been in that type of environment will tell you that, you know, when battle is closed between 2 teams, whether it's during the daytime or at night, there's a huge amount of confusion, and really nobody really knows what's going on. And while you might have several thousand people fighting against each other, there will be small pockets of activity or fighting taking place on an extensive battlefield. This was certainly the case in 1871. But the bottom line is there's a huge amount of confusion, and battlefield commanders, unless they're in a very prominent high position, are unable to see what is going on, and therefore are often unable to deploy their troops effectively. what this meant for the rebel army in 1871 was that their instructor said to them before they went into battle, he said to them, if you can hear noise anywhere on the battlefield, then what I want you to do is I want you to collectively march towards that noise, because that noise is demonstrative of the fact that there is a battle being fought on that particular part of the battlefield. So if you don't know what to do, if you're not engaged in a battle of your own or a skirmish of your own, but you hear a noise somewhere on the battlefield, then you are to go to that part of the battlefield as quickly as you can, because there will be some sort of confrontation taking place. Now that is a fairly simple set of instructions, but actually one of the principles of war is the concentration of force. It is a British Army principle, and that is that if you concentrate your force in the correct area, then you get a disproportionate return on your results or your activities. So wittingly or unwittingly, that general was encouraging his team to use the principle of the concentration of force, and the result was that this rebel army defeated, very well respected, very highly trained, very highly disciplined army from a different country, simply because they applied more force in the right area at the right time. Now the perception was therefore for the military that giving people very highly defined rules and regulations by which they must operate was counterintuitive and counterproductive for an environment where change is constant and your enemy's behavior is unpredictable. So as a direct result, according to some people, the concept of mission command was defined. Now this is a very simple visual that I've taken down from the internet to give you an understanding of some of the principles of mission command. I'll stipulate the three components, if I may, in a second. But as you'll see from the visual, in the center we have people and we have mission. And I'll come back to that in a second. What you must have for mission command to achieve is that the leaders must trust the people they're leading, and the people who are being led must trust their leaders. So there has to be that relationship of trust. Understanding is fundamental, because when the mission is dictated to the people, then what the leader is doing is saying, this is what I want you to achieve. When the leader passes the mission to the subordinate, whether on a battlefield or in a corporate organization, according to the principles of mission command, the leader must be very clear with the people that they're working with about what it is that the leader wants to have achieved. Now, a technique that I have seen leaders use effectively is the technique of brief back. And all that brief back is, or back brief is if I'm the leader and I impart to my team their mission, their objectives, what it is that I want them to achieve, then you create an opportunity for the team to go and reflect on what it is that they've been told, and then you give your team an opportunity to come back to you and to re-engage with you so that they're able to articulate back to you what it is that they think you have told them. It is a very, very simple principle, but a principle that works very effectively. Because if you then if having imparted the mission, if you then give your team the opportunity to go away and do and address the challenge, to define how they're going to overcome the challenge or achieve the objective, then if there is any misunderstanding, then what you're asking potentially some of your best people to do is go away and take action towards a goal that neither team is actually focused on, which is clearly very highly demotivating. So that is why the mutual understanding is so important. In the military, when you impart your mission to your subordinate, it is one sentence, and it is the objective in writing the mission is to be as concise as possible. So wrapped around mission and people, we start with decentralized execution. That is one of the key principles of mission command. As the leader, if I impart the mission to my team, then what I must do is step back and allow the execution to take place by the people to whom I've given the responsibility. This encourages timely and effective decision making because the subordinate team are not dependent on the leader to consistently validate or otherwise the decisions that the team are making. And the combination of decentralized execution and the timely use of effective decision making creates the unity of effort from the team. And the cycle, as you can see, is iterative, in that the team take action, they analyze what it is that they're doing, make adjustments as necessary, and then again re-engage the entire team. So that is a very simple visual to explain something which, if it's done effectively, is a great strategy, a great mechanism for engaging excellent people. If you're teaching Mission Command, we've certainly looked at the origins. The key, as I've said, potentially using the concept of brief back or back brief, is to give very, very clear instructions to your people as to what it is that you want to achieve. What is the objective of the activity that you're asking them to undertake? What is the key? What some leaders do is they not only impart what it is that they're trying to achieve or their objective. Some leaders, for a variety of different reasons, then start to tell their people how they expect them to achieve the objective. That is not part of Mission Command, because if you're going to tell your people what you want to achieve and how to achieve it, then there's an argument that says that you just go on and pull together a team who are going to implement your views or perceptions on how the objective should be achieved. It's not taking advantage of the potential that you have in your people. Once the team know what you're trying to achieve, the next step is to give them clarity on why it's important. And depending on the context of the environment within which you're using Mission Command, the why it matters, the what's in it for me, the what's in it for the team, the what's in it for the corporate entity, there may be a variety of different levels of why what you're trying to achieve is important. The more detail you can provide to your team on why this project or why this objective has importance for the individuals, the sub-teams, the teams, and the entity, then clearly, as we know, the greater the level of engagement and the greater level of buy-in. And then finally, in Mission Command, the last thing the team need to know before they're allowed to go and start taking action is the boundaries or parameters within which they are required to operate. So simple examples, for example, the boundaries within which one would operate in a corporate environment would be things like the amount of time that's available, the resources that are available, the financial resources that are available, so that you give the team clarity on the playing field within which you expect them to operate, so that the team do not get distracted in wondering whether the actions that they're taking are actions that are going to be acceptable to the entity. They know from day one within which boundaries they can operate. And really that's Mission Command in a very simple format. It's giving your team clarity on what it is that you're trying to achieve, why it matters to the entire business, if that's relevant, and then giving them real clarity on the boundaries within which they can operate, so that the team are able to go away, come up with ideas, start to implement the ideas, start to evaluate the success that they're having, start to understand where they can adjust their course of action, and just allow them to continue using that iterative cycle within boundaries that they fully understand and that they're comfortable with. Very simple concept. We are implementing it with a very successful IT business who are based here in Northern Ireland but do extensive work in the UK and the USA and on mainland Europe. They have embraced the concept very fully. What the new leaders will say, the new leaders having come from an IT background, a software development, a programming systems integration background. What the young leaders will say is that while the concept is very simple, the biggest challenge they have is allowing possibly younger, often brighter, possibly less experienced people. It's allowing that group of people to go off and take action. It's essentially the biggest challenge for the new leader is trusting their people to go off and do it their way. And that is the biggest challenge that we've encountered. When they do trust their people to go off and come up with solutions, they consistently report, the new leaders, the junior leaders consistently report the expectations they had of their people have been exceeded. But it's not easy. It's not easy. For people who have been writing software, managing systems integrations, it is very difficult for them to step back from being a practitioner and to harness or use the concept of mission command, because they're so used to doing as opposed to supporting or enabling the doing by others. So in closing, I'm certainly very happy to take questions in a moment, of course. That's the question that we posed. Do excellent people need to be led? A view I have, having worked with some really, truly excellent people, both in the military and in the corporate world, is that everybody benefits from effective leadership. I think it's a relatively simple statement to make. I had colleagues, when I was a salesman, I had colleagues who were excellent, who often, again, were overlooked. You know, they weren't, they were performing with very high levels of integrity and achieving great results, but often were overlooked. And on one or two occasions, they would come to me directly as an ex-colleague of theirs and just say, look, you know, I don't see my boss. I see my boss once a year, and actually I'd like to see him more consistently, because we get value from effective leadership, as everybody knows. Another point I've tried to make in the example of the sales team with 1,000 people and 20 top performers is that even though you're giving the decentralized decision-making authority, the leader still must take responsibility for the results that the team generates and how those results are generated. Because if you give a team boundaries, if you give one of your team boundaries as part of the mission command strategy, then as the leader you have to ensure that the team adheres to those boundaries. Because if the boundary exists, then there will be a consequence if the team cross the boundary. So it is not abdicating responsibility. It is providing your team with an opportunity to operate within a framework. And as my final point, really, before we take questions, we all know that the greatest asset any organization has is its people. Organizations spend a huge amount of money on identifying, recruiting, and training their people, their greatest asset. If you have great people, then what your leaders must do is develop the ability to allow those great people to give everything that they have to the organization. And while mission command is very simple, it's a wonderful strategy for saying to your people, look, we trust you, we'll be supportive of you, here's a business challenge, this is why it matters, these are the parameters within which you have to operate. Now go and get a great result. I've written a book called Leadership Without Rules. One of the chapters is focused on mission command. I'm very happy now, Mr. Ali, to take any questions that the participants may have.
Thank you very much, Brian, for a very interesting presentation.
Hello.
Very different topic, folks. We are now open for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the question box or raise your hand, and I can give you an opportunity to speak to the speaker directly. Let me move to a question box. There are questions already posted. One from Brother Sharaf. Some employees are outstanding performers, but the work requirements are changing. Would this mean we need to let them learn and count on themselves?
Okay, it's an excellent question. It's an excellent question and a challenge we have in our business at the moment. We have a great member of our team to whom we have entrusted a project, and we adhere to the principles of mission command. What I have discovered as the person who identified this particular member of the team as being suitable for the project is that we have seen a change in what's been required of the project outcome. And in working with a third party who is working in a supportive capacity, what I have discovered is that the member of my team does not currently have the skills required to deliver the project. So I take responsibility for that. I know he has the potential, but he currently doesn't have the skills. That has been identified for me in the iterative process of analyzing the results that we've been getting. What I have chosen to do is I've chosen to keep our member of the team on the project, but what I've created for him is the opportunity to spend some time with a relevant or an appropriate third party who I believe has the skill set, the skills and ability that can be transferred to the member of my team. So I am not participating in what they are doing together, but I am consistently communicating with the third party, who is now our subject matter expert, and the member of our team who is developing that expertise, just to understand the progress being made by the person in my team. What I can happily report is that he's making good progress. To try and answer the question fully, if he wasn't making the progress that I think was required to deliver the project, then the dilemma that I would have would be to either to stick with him, obviously, and compromise the potential outcome, or redeploy him to a different project, which might have a bearing on that individual's motivation. Those would be my two options. As I said, happily he's making progress. If he wasn't making progress, then in order to be true to myself, to the organization, and specifically to that young man, I would have no hesitation in redeploying him, but I would also recognize the implications to his motivation and engagement. So, Mr. Ali, a very long answer to a very short question, but an excellent question.
Thank you for an excellent answer. Let me move to a caller who has raised his hand. Let's see if we can connect an audio with him. Brother Javed Atif, you've raised your hand, sir. Do you have any question? Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question? Brother Javed Atif, can you hear us?
Yeah. Hello, Mr. Long.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Could you please introduce yourself and ask the question?
Yeah, this is Dr. Javed Atif from Afghanistan, and executive deputy of a pharmaceutical company. Within our team, we have some intellectuals, high professions who have a high level of information and knowledge, which in terms are technically high rated people. How these people could be managed, or how they could be lead, as they need also motivational issues as well as other affecting factors to make them all in par to achieve the company or overall goals.
Okay. Dr. Javed, thank you for the question.
And thank you, Mr. Brian, for your kind and very concise presentation.
Thank you. So I think it's a very, again, when I analyze myself and some of the clients I work with, I do not come from a highly academic environment. So, I have a good level of intellect. I think I'm told I have a decent IQ, but I work with, in some of the client companies that I work with, in investment banks. I've worked with one pharmaceutical company here in the UK, but I work with some people who are clearly very academic, highly intellectual, and that is the space with which they are familiar, and that is the space within which they enjoy operating. If the question, for example, is then how does one go about motivating people like that who may not be motivated by some of the more traditional forms of incentive or censure, then my thought would be that the concept of mission command would be the perfect incentive. With very, very bright, highly capable people, I think there's often an opportunity to help certain individuals influence significantly the definition of what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I think there's an opportunity potentially to engage very high caliber people very early in the process by sitting down with them and saying, in terms of the objective, this is what we think the objective should be, but I would, welcome or value your guidance on how we go about crafting or shaping the objective. So I think that presents an opportunity, Dr. Javed, but it's when I've worked with anybody, because the application of mission command is not that extensive, I find that when you turn around to people and say, look, I value your intellect, your experience, your knowledge, your energy, your commitment, and I trust you, that so few people are exposed to that on a consistent basis, I find that people respond extremely well to that, and you get very, very good levels of results.
Thank you very much. Dr. Javed, any supplementary question you have?
Yeah. Thank you. What I wanted to just rephrase what I understood, just concentrating them toward the main values or the main goals, our job objective. So all would be motivated going toward that. While there is an environment, with a trust environment and a mutual understanding environment, makes this to more be facilitated. Yes?
Absolutely. A very, very concise but clear explanation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mr. Bayer.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Javed.
Thank you, Dr. Javed, for posing this question. We have another question in the box from Antonio Almeida. The question is, mission command requires substantial effort and time. How do you see mission command in current company's environment that needs to be faster serving the customer?
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Antonio, thank you for that question. The decentralized decision making has massive implications for serving customers, because what you're saying is, and I work with a lot of regulated businesses here within the financial services structure in the UK, but what you're saying to your front line, to your people who are serving your customers, what you're saying is, here is a level of authority or a level of control or some boundaries within which you can exercise your judgment. Now, a lot of companies are very uncomfortable with that, but there are lots of studies that have shown that if you give frontline people a certain discretion, a certain financial discretion within which to operate, that when you analyze the speed of response and the impact on the client or customer experience, that the financial investment is rewarded many, many times over, and the engagement to the frontline customer-facing colleague is significant. So I would wholeheartedly support the application of mission command in a customer-facing environment.
I have another interesting...
Is that too short an answer?
That's a good, valid answer, fair enough. Another one, the last one. What is the key hurdle in a thought process of senior executives or excellent people to believe they are not made to be led, coached, or even trained?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Key hurdle in a thought process of senior executives or excellent people to believe that they are not made to be led, coached, or trained.
Okay. If I can just repeat the question, Mr. Ali, is the question, how does one overcome the hurdle that exists within senior people whose perception is that they don't need to be coached, managed, or led? Have I understood the question?
This is exactly what the question is.
Okay. Thank you. Again, another very good question. I think there are lots of people who hold the belief that I think the belief they hold is that there is no significant value in being coached, managed, or led. I think that's the key that I've encountered. They are not necessarily resistant to being coached, managed, or led, but senior, high-performing people will consistently analyze the value of the leadership, management, or coaching that they're being exposed to. And if they're not getting value from it, then they become resistant. I encounter that a lot in one of the client companies we have here, where all the salespeople are self-employed, but the leadership tier are employed. So the self-employed people are saying to the employed coach, what value am I going to get out of this relationship? And if they are getting value, then they are open-minded. If they are not getting value, then I think very reasonably they are not open-minded to it. So I have worked on a one-to-one basis with some practitioners who have told me at the beginning that they do not want the coaching relationship or the business relationship with me. And I acknowledge that very openly, and we agree that at the end of any session that I'm engaged with, they will analyze with a simple yes or no response whether they have had value. If the answer is yes, we progress the relationship. If the answer is no, for one time only, we try and analyze why they haven't had benefit. We then try once more to provide them with benefit. And if again, at the end of that, if I think they have been engaged, but they're still not getting value, then we disengage. We no longer continue the process. So I've always been very upfront with anybody that I coach. If they think they are not getting value, then we disengage. But I think there is a lot of very mediocre management, a lot of mediocre coaching and mediocre leadership capability being deployed across the world. And I think senior people, by virtue of the fact that they've been around for quite a long time, have been exposed to a variety of different managers or leaders, some of which hasn't been great. So therefore, we as the leadership cadre, we have created the hurdle. And I think we need to acknowledge that. If we acknowledge that we've created the hurdle, then the first step is to analyze how we go about re-engaging. But I think from a leader's perspective, a coach's perspective, if we are not delivering value to the individual, we have no right to assume that the relationship will continue or that the coachee will be open-minded.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brian Dunlop, for the answer and as well as for this presentation. Any concluding remarks that you would like to give before we dismiss out?
No, I'd like to thank everybody who's attended the webinar. It's a great privilege, for example, to speak to somebody like Dr. Javed from Afghanistan. We otherwise would not have the opportunity to spend time sharing ideas together. So, Mr. Ali and Ravida, I'd like to thank you for creating this opportunity. I've been looking forward to it. I hope those who have attended have had some value, and I shall certainly look forward to attending webinars in future as an attendee. But thank you.
Very much indeed, and we look forward to remaining engaged with you, sir. I would like to thank you, especially on behalf of Mile, for this, for your time and giving this presentation, a very excellent topic that you've chosen today. So, thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. Please, just an announcement that we are recording this webinar, which will be uploaded on our community, community.mile.org. So stay tuned to our community for upcoming webinars and for accessing the archive section of the webinar as well. With that note, I would like to end this session. So you all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're calling from. Assalamu alaikum, rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Madinah Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, MILE.